I got pregnant at 17 by a guy who was in prison and much older than me. My name is Emma, I'm 17 years old, and I live in Seattle. It seems like a normal city, and I'm just as normal a girl with everything like everyone else. I'm in ninth grade. After school, I love going out with my friends, walking around the city, talking, joking around. Sometimes it doesn't matter where we are. Even if it's raining outside, we can always find a place to have fun. I can sit on a bench in the park or go to a friend's house. At times like this, when everything is wet and overcast, and we were laughing and arguing about nothing, the world seemed simple and so clear. My friends are all just like me. We find common ground easily, we don't bother with fancy clubs and expensive restaurants. All we have to do is to be around each other and enjoy the moment. Even if it rains like a bucket, we can just get together in some secluded place, chat, and have fun. In such moments, it seemed like our whole life was an endless summer full of laughter and simple joys. But everything changed when I found out I was pregnant. It was like a blow to the head, like a thunderclap. As before, I did not think about the future, did not make grandiose plans, and suddenly it turned out that now I was going to become a mom. I don't even understand where this moment came from. It was my decision, and not really a decision, but rather a blind faith that everything would be fine. Vlad and I had decided from the beginning that we weren't going to use protection. I thought that I would never have children, and then such news. I used to be able to stay away from home for days at a time. I just didn't want to go back to my apartment because everything there felt heavy and uncomfortable. But now my belly was getting bigger and bigger every day, and I couldn't go out. I was forced to stay at home, and the whole world seemed to become smaller, shrunk to the size of this small two-room apartment where I lived with my mother and grandmother. I began to feel how this new stage of life was distancing me from everything I was used to, from what had once seemed easy and understandable. My mom tried to support me, even though she couldn't say that her life had turned out the way she wanted it to. She had long since divorced my father, and she had her own life, which I couldn't find a place in. Grandma was certainly an important part of my life, but her character was becoming more and more unpleasant. Alcohol made her life unbearable, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. Sometimes I felt like I had nowhere to turn, that I was alone in the world, even when there were people around me. Every day it was getting harder and harder for me to see my pregnancy as something good. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to cope. I thought about the future, but it seemed so vague and unclear now. The familiar life was over, and now I was sitting in my room, going through my thoughts and fears, not knowing what to do. My mornings began, as always, in the small two-room apartment I shared with my mother and grandmother. It wasn't easy. My mom is a woman with a huge heart, but she couldn't say her life turned out the way she dreamed it would either. She divorced my father when I was only 7 years old, and since then, her whole life has been about working, about providing for us. My subscribe to DeepL Pro to edit this document. Visit www.deepl.com Pro for more information. Grandmother, who lives with us, has become the source of much trouble. Her alcoholism became a heavy burden that hung over our family all the time. I always knew my grandmother drank. Her life was full of bitterness, and her loneliness and hatred of the world poured out on my mom and me. She often made a scene when she was drunk. Grandma was someone who could yell at me over nothing, or just not find common ground with me. Every day I could feel her aggression, her sharp words directed in my direction, and how that aggression became a part of my life. I dreaded coming home because I knew that another storm would be waiting for me outside the door instead of a warm welcome. Every time she got drunk, I would get scared. I felt like I couldn't handle it anymore. I tried to understand why she was like that. She seemed different when she was young, but then her life went wrong. Divorce from her grandfather, drinking, losing her job. It all took its toll. I remember me and my mom taking her to doctors, trying to help her, but it was very hard to change anything. It was like she was becoming more withdrawn and unapproachable every day. In her eyes, I could often see the pain she was trying to drown out with alcohol. But what could I do? To hold back, to be silent, to be patient. There wasn't much support from others. I seem to live in a crowded city, but I feel so lonely. My mom tried to support me, but it was hard for her. She and I practically didn't communicate except about household chores. All my emotions, my worries stayed inside. I couldn't open up to my mom because she was already so exhausted and depressed. Besides, her attempts to get her life together were not successful either. She was studying to be a pastry chef, but there was hardly any work in her specialty. Her career didn't work out, and now she's taking it out on me, trying to convince me that without an education and a stable job, I can't be anything. I didn't want to go back to school, even though it was clear that I had to. I had always thought that studying was not my thing, and that I would still be living in this city. But now that I was expecting a child, I felt my life changing, and suddenly things like stability and financial independence were important to me. All these thoughts came to me more and more often. Would I be a good mother? Would this child be able to grow up in a normal environment? These questions plagued me. The family life I had once dreamed of now seemed a distant and impossible goal. Although I tried to find answers, I felt more and more like I was at a crossroads. When I met Jack, I was only 15. He was older than me, and that seemed like something special. His confidence, his kindness, and the moment when he revealed his darker side to me, it all drew me in. He was like a man from another world, with a past that I couldn't even think of. At the time we met, Jack had just gotten out of prison after serving time for stealing a car. Yeah, it was weird, but I couldn't believe that this guy I was walking around Seattle with could have such a history. I felt like everyone had their dark spots in their lives, but I didn't think it would be such a big deal to me. Jack was good looking, and his smile could melt away any doubts. We talked a lot, laughed a lot, and I loved being around him. Everything I'd heard about his past didn't embarrass me. He was honest and straightforward. He had his own job. He bought old cars, repaired them, and sold them. There was money, and I didn't have to worry about tomorrow. Life seemed to be on a good path, and I could enjoy the moments. But everything changed when I found out I was pregnant. At that moment, I felt like the world was falling apart. I wasn't ready, but the decision had already been made. Jack was excited at first, saying he would take care of me and our baby, that everything would be okay. But that was before I found out about his cheating. It was an accident. Jack had left his other phone at home, and I, just out of curiosity, decided to check it out. I knew he didn't like me going through his things, but something inside me made me do it. And lo and behold, I saw a video on the screen that changed everything. It was a video of his ex-girlfriend. He was drunk with her, they were laughing, and at one point he started kissing her. It sounded awful. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He swore to me that it was over between them a long time ago, that she was just a classmate, and now I was seeing all of this. He was with her, and he lied to me. It was like a stab in the back. My feelings for him changed, but not immediately. I didn't know how to react. I felt like I couldn't trust him anymore, but on the other hand, he was the father of my child. I couldn't just pick up and leave like I would with any other man. He was part of my life, part of my world, and I didn't know what to do. He started apologizing, saying that it was a fluke, that he was wrong, that things would be different. But I couldn't just let it go. The pain I felt was so deep that I didn't have the strength to forgive him right away. I was scared that this man I was going to build my family with had turned out to be something I didn't expect him to be. This video was the final step that made me think about my future with him. I tried to think about the fact that a future with him might be the only chance for the two of us. But every day I felt more and more like my trust was broken, and I couldn't find the strength to forgive him. I couldn't understand how he could deceive me so easily when I trusted him. It was like a betrayal I couldn't ignore. I didn't know who to rely on anymore. My world was shaky again, and now I couldn't even be sure of myself. Every day my life was getting more complicated, whereas before I could go to parks, go out with friends, or not think about the future at all. Now I felt like everything had changed. My pregnancy continued with the reminder that I was no longer a teenager, and my life would now be very different. Everything that was important to me before, hanging out, nights out with friends, meaningless conversations, all of that has receded into the background. I realize that I'm going to be an adult now, and that process is going to start much sooner than I expected. When I found out I was going to be a mom, I was scared, really scared. After all, I was just beginning to realize that my previous worries were just toys, and now I was beginning to face the challenges. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle it. Pregnancy brought me both joy and uncertainty at the same time. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I was only 17 years old, and I didn't know how to be the best mom I could be. Everything around me was new, foreign, and I couldn't figure out how it was all going to work out. When my belly started to grow, I realized that I had nowhere else to go. I couldn't go out with my friends like I used to because I felt uncomfortable. There were no longer those easy, casual evenings when we would stroll the streets carefree. Instead, I stayed at home, trying to get used to the idea that my life would be different. My room became my appliance. Even though I didn't want to be here, and every day I thought about finding a way out, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was now going to be a grown woman. This feeling came out of the blue, but it was now part of my reality. I began to worry not only about myself, but also about the child that was inside of me. Every day I thought about how he would grow up, what I had to do to ensure his future. But the changes in my life were not limited to that. I noticed more and more often that the problems in the family were becoming more and more obvious. My grandmother continued to drink, and her condition became even worse. She often became aggressive, yelling at me, and I was scared. This was not the atmosphere I wanted to create for my child. I began to think how I could get out of this situation, how I could make myself safe, and most importantly, comfortable. I began to socialize less with my friends and go out less. The feeling that I was losing something began to come over me in waves. I couldn't find answers to my questions. My mom tried to support me, but she herself was such a caregiver for my grandmother that she didn't have time to give me much attention. I realized that my mom was worried about me too, but like always, she was in a secondary role. Now all the energy went into survival, and my mom tried her best to keep the family afloat. All of these changes, not only in relationships but also in my own body, were stressful for me. I wasn't prepared for the fact that I would have to grow up so fast. But there was no time for reflection. The baby was with me, and I realized that everything depended on me now. It had been a few weeks since I found out I was going to be a mom, and my life had taken a very different turn. I continued to sit at home for long periods of time thinking about what would happen next. But the more time I spent in that silence, the more I felt everything around me crumbling. To me, that no one around me understood what I was going through. I'm thinking of making contact with Jack, but his behavior after everything that's happened scares me. He apologized, said things were changing, that he was ready to be there for us and look after our baby. But it was getting harder and harder for me to believe what he was saying. Every explanation he gave seemed like an excuse. He didn't realize that his cheating hadn't just destroyed my trust, but had undermined the foundations of what I thought was a real relationship. I was disappointed. I couldn't understand how he could betray me so easily when I truly believed things would be different between us. I think about the fact that all his actions were random, that he is not what he seems at first glance, but every day these thoughts became more and more difficult. Jack continued to stay close to me. He offered to meet, to talk, but I felt like I couldn't trust him anymore, and everything he said sounded like empty words. I think to understand what I should do, forgive him or move on. After all, he was the father of my child, and I couldn't just brush him off. But in my heart, I felt that if he continued to behave like this, I would not be able to forgive him. I would not be able to build any future with him. The worst part was the realization that I couldn't give my child what he needed. Even if Jack had stayed around, all the problems, the arguments, the mistrust, and his past kept me from believing in our future together. There was no way he and I could make a relationship work. He continued to be in search of his life, forgetting about me and my child. And I had to build a future. I had to think about how I would feed the child, how I would raise him. if even I could not trust this man, with whom I should have observed these moments. It was hard for me because I still felt love for Jack. In the back of my mind, I hoped that my soul would change, that he would start to appreciate me, but I couldn't find it. He continued to disappoint me, and every time I thought I understood what I should do next, his actions became more incomprehensible. We talked about it, but the conversations were not called for. Meanwhile, my life continued to be filled with new worries. I realized that I need to cope not only with emotional difficulties, but also with what surrounds me. The problems in the house, the constant arguments, my grandmother's drinking, it was all unbearable. I felt like I couldn't find a solution, and that loneliness was something inevitable. Sometimes I felt like everything I was trying to do didn't make sense. But despite all of this, I kept pushing forward. I couldn't let myself give up. After all, there was a little person looking at me now, and I had to be independent. The problems in my relationship with Jack and the increasingly tense family atmosphere reminded me that real life is not made up of easy moments. I couldn't fathom that my life at 17 would be full of fights, mistakes, and disappointments, but I knew I couldn't change the past. All I had left was to step forward and hope that someday I could find my way to the light. When my third trimester began, I suddenly realized how fast time was flying by. Every day my life was getting bigger, the thoughts of the future, of my baby were becoming more vivid and unstoppable. I could no longer stand by the fact that I would soon be a mom. At first I was worried, afraid that I wouldn't be able to cope, that I wouldn't be able to give my baby what he needed. But with each passing day, I began to feel myself being filled with new meaning. In that moment, I realized that my step was my life, my new purpose. All the fears, all the light that had plagued me, suddenly became less important compared to the fact that the light of the little person I needed was about to emerge. When I found out I was having a boy, I felt a mixture of joy and excitement. Jack and I had always said that if we had a son, we would name him Frank. And so it was. The name I loved so much was now a symbol of a new life for me. All my thoughts revolved around how cool my baby would look, how I would hold him in my arms and look after him. But despite all these thoughts, it wasn't entirely clear what was going to happen next. We still had minor issues with Jack, and the relationship with his family hadn't gotten better. Jack's mom continued to deal with my problem without taking me seriously. I increasingly felt that I couldn't be in that house, couldn't live under the constant pressure. But I also realized that I had no other choice. My life and my child's life depended on the technical decisions I would make in the coming months. As time went on, I began to realize that I could not continue to live my life the way I had been living it. My life has to change. I have to be independent for my own sake and for Frankie's. I contemplate what comes next, but I still felt like I wasn't ready for everything that awaited me. Every day I waited for him, my son, with anticipation and fear at the same time. I realized that he was changing everything. My future was all about him. One day, after one of my fights with Jack, I realized that I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. I couldn't keep holding all the worries and pain inside. I decided to do something with him. It was hard because I still didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing: if I didn't fight for my happiness, no one would do it for me. The day I went for the ultrasound, I felt like something had changed in my life. I found out the sex of my baby, and it brought me a joy I couldn't describe in words. I had been waiting for this moment, and now that I knew I was having a son, I felt confidence come back to me. Everything was starting to fall into place. I decided that I would fight for my family, for my child, for my future. When Frank was born, it was incredible. I held him in my arms and could not think that he was my child. He was small and fragile, but in his eyes I saw the whole world. Everything I had been through seemed unimportant in that moment. My son was here, and that was all that mattered. Jack was finally starting to show his concern, and I could see him changing. He became more attentive, caring more about Frank and me. But I still hadn't forgotten that he had hurt me. I couldn't forgive him right away, but looking at our son, I began to believe that things could change. Frank became my meaning, my new life. He gave me strength to look forward to the future. Despite all the difficulties and fears, I knew that I would do anything for him. And even though my journey was just beginning, I felt that now I had a chance at happiness, at building my family, even if it was with the labor and pain I was receiving. But now I wasn't alone. And with that knowledge, I felt that I was capable of handling any challenge that came my way.